My name is John Bryant. I am an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. I am interviewing Mr. John Plattner on September the 13th, 2006 at the Walnut Hills Branch Library. Good morning, Mr. Plattner.
Good morning, sir.
Tell me, what were you doing and how did you come to go into the Army?
I was a student at Northwestern University, and the draft, I was registered for the draft. The draft called me, and I had finished 3/4 the first year up there, went right immediately from high school into university. And I left from Evanston, Illinois, and went into the Army, and that was in, I believe, May of 1944.
May of 1944, so you were drafted.
Yes.
Where did you do your basic training?
In basic training, we were at Camp Hood, Texas, now Fort Hood. We were trained to operate anti-tank guns, just infantry replacement training. And they were 37 and 57 millimeter guns. As it turned out, at the end of training, we had several of us who were not 19 years old. And there was some obscure law apparently that you could not be sent overseas as a replacement if you were not 19 years old. So we were sent to Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi. It took 3 days to get there from Texas. And
how did you go?
In troop training.
Okay.
Yeah. One of these boxcar type sleepers.
It took 3 days.
It took us 3 days to go from the center of Texas to just north of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And got off the train. There was an adjutant general major. He hopped up on a platform and said, "Men, this division is alerted for overseas shipment," which we were a little surprised at, but that was okay. And then we went immediately home for 10 days, never went into the camp at all. Came back, reported in, and I was a medic. So my anti-tank training was not too well used.
So then you went overseas.
Within a matter of probably a couple of months, the whole division was packed up and on its way to Europe.
What did you find when you got to Europe? This was still in 44, right?
Yes, this was. And we were in a convoy. Convoy went into Marseille. Literally, the troop ship I was on landed and tied up right at the dock in the center of Marseille. The invasion of southern France had taken place several months before that. We went by truck to the top of a hill outside of Marseille. It had nothing but mud. This is in December. And put up our little pup tents and waited around for a period of time. Not the most comfortable way. Then we eventually got loaded into a train into these box cars, the 48 box cars. Everybody had 4 blankets. And so the way we coped with that was to put half of our blankets on the floor of the car. And then at night we had to sleep, head to the outside walls and feet like this because of the size of the car. And we put the other blankets on top of that. It was nice and warm in December. It wasn't bad. That took 2 or 3 days. We saw some destruction on the railroad on the way. And then we went from there, trucked to a position on the Rhine River. The whole division, of course, hadn't arrived, and so we were just sort of filling in. The unit that had been there went north to help with the bulge, and we just sat there basically during that period of time.
So as a medic, what did you do?
I was a litter bearer. We were in the 1st Battalion of the 253rd Regiment. And the 1st Battalion, each battalion had an aid station, consisted of a medical doctor, a medical administrative officer who had been trained but was not a doctor, and then a number of technicians and a litter squad of 12 men.
Now, what does a litter squad do?
Well, the litter squad, if we're in action now, we have one man who is assigned to be with an infantry company through all the time. He's always out there with them. He does the immediate bandaging, whatever he can do if someone is wounded. And then our job was, as quickly as we could get there, to go up and pick up that person on a litter, carry him back to a position where we were out of danger, put that rack on a rack on a Jeep, and the Jeep driver would drive him back to this aid station where the medical doctor was. They'd do immediate work there, and then they would go on back through the evacuation channel.
Now, was there fighting taking place during the time that you were there, and so did you have quite a bit of work to do in that regard?
Yes, we did.
What was you were not trained as a medic?
We got some training.
Okay.
We had a kit with us. It's in this picture that you have. And it had bandages, it had morphine in it, some kinds of things that you could, if you had to do something, you could do immediately. And occasionally when we got to where this wounded person was, there was something that needed to be done. You needed to put a new bandage on. Those things were ingeniously designed so that you could do it very easily, and everything was sterile. And we could give them a morphine shot if necessary.
So actually, you actually did administer some medical attention
very
as
little,
well as
very basic,
as well as carting the bodies, not the bodies because they're still alive, hopefully.
Well, that raises an interesting point, and that was if we were moving a person and he died right there, our instructions were to leave him there. We couldn't do any more good for him. We could do good for
somebody else. Did that happen with some degree of regularity?
Not too many. As I remember, we certainly didn't pick up any dead bodies in evacuation, but we may have had one or two
that passed along the way.
There's an incident that sort of tells you how your frame of mind and your outlook gets changed in these circumstances. We had crossed the Sar River, and the engineers didn't have the bridges in so that we had vehicles. So the only way we could evacuate people was to take them down a railroad track for about 2 miles, walking on the ties because the Germans had planted little boxes of mines, and if you stepped on one of those, you lost your leg to about here. So and the ties are not arranged in the right position to walk. So it was a very difficult thing to do. We had some German prisoners, and we had them take the first people back. Then we ran out of prisoners. So we had the first sergeant of A company. He had been shot through the head, but he was alive, and we had to carry him back this whole way. It was a very difficult thing to do. And then we were able to turn him over to an ambulance and so forth, and he went back to the hospital. Later on, maybe within a couple of weeks, we heard the word that he had died. Our reaction, if you'll pardon the expression, was, well, that ungrateful son of a bitch. We did all this, and he died. It turned out he hadn't died later. We found he lost the hearing in one ear and the sight in one eye, but he survived, so that was great. But that was our immediate reaction.
Let me stop you for a second. You're a teenager. This must have been a pretty traumatic kind of experience for an 18, 19-year-old.
I've reflected on that some. They are called the greatest generation and all that stuff. I think basically we just did what had to be done. It certainly was a maturing experience. It was one I would not elect to repeat, but I think it was a very good experience to have. And I never really found it that traumatic. You just sort of
It was there and you had to do it, so you did it.
And you put up with whatever you had to put up with.
What was life like? Because you went almost from school, almost into combat-like situations.
Yeah, we're really within 9 months.
What kind of social life? What did you do for relaxation? How did you unwind?
Once you were in the combat zone, you really didn't have any relaxation except at times. I think basically you talked to your buddies that were around, and we did have, I remember at one point, they set up movies. We could go and see a movie. And the Red Cross had women in a van that when they could, would come up and give you coffee and donuts and that kind of thing. Down at Camp Hood, you could get a pass on the weekend and go into a town. I had grown up, or gone to high school in New Orleans, and that wasn't very far away from the camp in Mississippi. And so I went down there and visited some friends. You could do things like that while you were in the States, but once you were overseas, there really wasn't much you could do. After the war was over, they had many, many books, paperback books, and I read a lot of books during that time.
How many months were you in Europe?
Well,
and the war was still ongoing?
We were in combat from December till April, or late April, beginning of May, just before the war ended. We were relieved.
Do you remember what you were doing and when you heard that the war was coming to an end?
Well, it was obvious to us that it was coming to an end. And then we were relieved and went into an occupation situation. And the thing I remember about that is that we heard on the radio, we were under blackout conditions, and this is a town in central Germany, living in, as we always did, in German buildings. Might have been an apartment building, or we put our aid stations in taverns, because it was a good place to operate things. But we had the blackout curtains or shutters closed and that kind of thing. Heard on the radio that the war was over. Opened the thing, of course, everybody was shouting. And immediately got a telephone call. The blackout conditions were still in effect. Typical Army.
So as you captured German territory, you set up aid stations
that's right,
those
all
areas.
along the way.
As you advanced.
You had chests of equipment, and we had trucks, and the people in the aid station packed that stuff up, moved it. They'd look for a good spot to set up, and this room would make a good aid station. It has long tables. You can set a litter on a table. It's a good height to work on the person. And that was why we used those kinds of
the bar tables.
And because they had long tables in these places. And usually a straight-in doorway, so that you could maneuver through that. And so it was a practical thing to do. We very rarely, only for a couple of days, ever lived outside once we were in the combat situation. We were always in some building.
You went in the Army in 44.
Yes.
And you were drafted for a 2-year period.
Well, you were drafted
until
you were released.
So how long were you? How long did you serve?
Just about 2 years.
About 2 years.
Yeah.
And for most of that time, all of that time, other than when you came back to muster out, you were overseas.
Yes.
And didn't come back until you were really in the process of being relieved of duty.
That's right. That's right.
What was it like in the post-fighting period?
Well, that was the occupation period. Let me back up just a little bit, because I think it's interesting. You asked me about the end of the war. The end for us was one day in which we were on the Autobahn going from Gunsberg to Landsberg and toward Munich. And we were going, the trucks were going 40 or 50 miles an hour that we were riding on. And the Germans were coming out of the woods, trying to surrender. And we just, told them to go back. At the end of that day, we were in a little town, maybe 125 of us, and 4,000 Germans came in and surrendered. So it was pretty clear that, and they marched in, officers at the head of the columns, and that was clearly the end of the war. And at that point, then our trucks, and we moved up to this town in the central part of Germany, and so then we were in the occupation zone. Well, in that, for a while, in that division, we alternated a month in Tauber-Bischofsheim, the first town, and a month in Wertheim, which is maybe 5 or 6 miles away. And we really didn't do much of anything during that period of time. Obviously, if some GI was sick in that area, they'd come in for, like we'd come into a clinic. But there were certainly nothing for the litter bearers to do particularly, except the normal kinds of stuff that you're assigned to do if you're an enlisted man.
Yeah, did you have any idea at that time of some of the kinds of atrocities that had taken place?
Yes, in the sense, never got to Dachau, although part of our division actually did. But what you saw then during was, even in moving in the occupation and afterward, were displaced persons, DPs, in striped clothing, very, very minimal clothing, who were very, very underweight, and they were walking home.
So you saw those that were able to be ambulatory and to walk away from the...
Yes.
So when did you come back to the States?
Probably in April of 1946.
1946.
And I had been in 3 different occupation situations during the time.
During that time period. You mentioned 2.
Well, the reason is that there was a point system. You got points for months of service, more points for overseas service. If you got medals, decorations, you got 5 points for each of those. And then there was a cutoff point, and people were brought home in the order of the number of points that they had, because there wasn't enough shipping to bring everybody home right away. And so when the 63rd Division, the Army's approach was to move the high point people into a division like the 63rd, which had been created during World War II, bring that home and disband the division. And so I got moved from the 63rd Division at one point to the 36th Division, which was the Texas National Guard, in a different part of Germany, and was there for several months. And then the same thing happened to them. So then I got sent to the 3rd Division, which is a regular Army division, and was in Europe for many, many years afterward.
Okay.
Now, we did do some things in the 3rd Division. Okay. We went out and did sanitary inspections of mess hall, kitchens, and things like that, besides reading books.
So you got a lot of reading in, and you got a lot of inspection of facilities to make sure that they were sanitary. Any contact with the German general population?
Yes. In that last situation in the city of Kassel, which had been very severely bombed, but there was one area that wasn't destroyed. It was upscale residential area, and we were, being a medical detachment, we were a very small unit. So we were housed in a building, a house that belonged to a family. There were 2 apartments and 2 bedrooms up on the 3rd floor. There was a garage. They had had a car before the war, and the car was long gone. And they were moved out of the house. So we lived in the house. I don't know where they went during the night to sleep, but during the day, it was a father, a mother, and a 10-year-old girl. They would be at the house. My father kept it was winter time, we could get the coal, he kept the furnace going, they had central heat, it was a good house. And the mother was cleaning up, I can remember her scrubbing stairways and that kind of thing. In a sense, she was protecting her own property. And she also did our laundry. The equipment for the laundry was a big tub about this big around. You literally built a fire under it to heat the water, and we had the soap. And she would take these heavy woolen uniforms, boil them in this, I can't imagine doing this, but it worked. And then she would dry them, iron them. She would do a week's laundry for 3 cigarettes.
So it was actually a job. They were not conscripted or anything.
No, they volunteered.
Because this was their house, and they anticipated that they would be coming back into it.
Yes, and they did, but 10 years later. They didn't get that house back until 10 years. And just as a PS on this, my wife and I went back.
That was the question I was going to ask you.
Okay. And we visited them, and we spent a night in the same house, 17 years later. And the mother and father are long dead at this point, but we still are in touch with the daughter.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, do you speak German?
No. And she doesn't speak English very well, so we don't communicate much. But we have visited several times. But that was a very, very interesting experience.
I'm going to switch forward a bit now. You're now out of the military. Did you do anything in the military that had anything to do with your post-military life?
Yes. I was fortunate enough I applied and was selected because there were literally not much to do. To go to Biarritz American University. And the Army had set up a university in Biarritz, France, and another one in England. And you could apply. And since I had had a year of university, that obviously helped. They brought faculty members over from the U.S. My old chemistry professor from Northwestern was there in a military uniform. And I took three university courses that I got credit for. Not to mention being in Biarritz, living in a hotel, and being able to visit Carcassonne and Toulouse and various places on weekends and so forth. So the credit that I got, and probably, it's funny how things happen. The most valuable thing that I took there, because it was never available in high school, was typing. Taught by a professor from Detroit, University of Detroit, and in the age of the computer, that is the most useful training I could possibly have had. I took another course in an American novel and a political science course, and that was fine.
So when you then got out of the Army, did you go back to Northwestern? Or?
Yes, but before I did that, I made a long trip. My parents lived in New Jersey, and made a long trip down and drove literally to New Orleans. I visited Chicago, where I had many relatives, and my grandparents were there. And also went out to Wichita and saw my old commanding officer, and got pictures and things from him. Okay.
I know that you ended up in Cincinnati, Ohio, right? Working at Procter & Gamble.
Right.
So tell me the route that got you from mustered out of the Army,
Okay.
and into PNG.
I went back to Northwestern, and I believe for the summer, may have been the summer quarter, I'm not sure. And was in the School of Commerce, which no longer exists at the undergraduate level. And went straight on through and got a bachelor's degree in business.
Did you use the GI Bill at that time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that paid the freight. And then I graduated in 1949. In 1949, the economy was not too good, and there were the number of jobs available was minimal. And although I had some interviews, a job opened up on the Northwestern campus, which would allow me to go to graduate school and be in charge of the business operations of the student publications. It was a two-year term, and you did I could get a master's in business in 1 year because I had already had all the basic courses. But if I spread that over 2 years, then I was in the office the rest of the time. So that worked out very nicely, and I took that job and got an MBA after the 2-year period ended, when the economy was much better in 1951, and I was interviewed by Procter & Gamble, invited to come to Cincinnati, offered a job, and here I am.
And that brings us to 2000, and no, because you retired from Procter in 1988.
Right.
So, so you were at Procter then.
36 and a half.
Right. Yeah. When I ran that through my head, I recognized that's quite some time.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't happen much anymore in terms of people staying for their whole career with one company, but it did during that period.
We're probably coming to the close. Can you think of something that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, or what would you like to add on before we close up?
Well, I think that the kinds of experiences that we had during the combat period, I can remember a number of them. I mentioned that I was 19 years old. One of my jobs was to take a leg from here down, put it in a box, and bury it in a garden, you know. And there were things like that that are almost bizarre when you think about it. But we made it through, and it's, as I say, it's an experience that I wouldn't have volunteered for, I wouldn't want to repeat, but I think in terms of, in many respects, it was a very good maturing experience and has stood me in good stead later.
You mentioned it as a maturing experience.
Quickly maturing.
As a 19-year-old,
yeah.
What do you think in retrospect was sort of the maturing? You came fresh out of being enrolled in college,
Yeah.
And the life of a freshman or a sophomore on a college campus, into life and death situations almost immediately. What do you take from that?
I think maybe you're a little more focused later on in what you do, and maybe a little more energetic. When I think about kids that age these days that don't seem to know what they want to do, and I'm not saying that I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but it's hard for me to answer that question because there's nothing that pops into my mind.
Well, I have certainly enjoyed being honored to be asked to interview you. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I think that the rest of the population, when they see it, will do also.
Well, of course, it's always fun to talk about yourself. You've done a fine job. I've enjoyed it myself.
Thank you, sir.
through a field, just simply to get across it to another place. And this is when the war was going on, and the Germans had planted these shoe mines, S-C-H-U-H. It was a hinged wooden box so that your mine detector would not find it. And if you stepped on that box, it blew up. And that's where I got the leg to bury, for example, from somebody who had that experience. And we got about halfway through this field and then noticed that if you looked down this way, you could see rows where these things had been planted. Well, of course, that made it easy to avoid. But on the other hand, we were awfully lucky that we didn't happen to step on one along the way.
You ever think about that, how much luck really played?
I guess I'd have to say I'm not sure whether it was luck or whether it was divine.
Something was watching out for you.
Yeah, exactly. A number of things like that.
Because that leg that you were burying, it could just as well.
Oh, you know it, sure. Had the boot still out. Yeah, it's. I do think that some higher power was looking out for me.
Any other story
What?
that
I
you
don't
can?
know.
Well, you just say for the luck of whatever.
Yeah.
It was that person and not this person.
Yeah, that's right.
And had I taken the right road as opposed to the left road, that could be me.
Yeah.
Again, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Now I will tell you a story off the record.